All right. So thank you everyone for joining us for the Susitna River Coalition's last winter speaker event of the season. Today, we're really excited to have Luc Mehl here, who probably doesn't need too much of an introduction here. But I will give a little brief background of the Susitna River Coalition and what we're working on these days before I pass the screen over to Luc for us to hear about some of his travels in the West Susitna drainage. My name is Margaret Stern, and I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Susitna River Coalition. For those of you that are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a very small grassroots nonprofit based in the village of Talkeetna. We first formed in response to the Susitna-Watana Hydro project, but since that project has been shelved for the time being, we have broadened our focus to look at issues that have the capacity to alter our watershed. And one of the big things that we're working on right now and following is the West Susitna Industrial Access Corridor. Now, this is a 100+ mile mining access road that would begin in Port Mackenzie and travel all the way into the Estelle Mining District near Rainy Pass. So this would dramatically alter the region, have irreparable impacts on fish and wildlife habitat, and many really unique ways of life and ways of experiencing our watershed. So I'm excited to have Luc here today. Again, we focused a lot on hunting and fishing in this region, but there's so many other opportunities to get out and so many unique experiences to be had in this region. So Luc Mehl grew up in McGrath, which is right on the Kuskokwim River. He has graduate degrees from UCSB, which you will have to help me with what school that is. Luc, and MIT. He applies academic and village skill sets to his work as an outdoor education instructor. And Mehl has traveled over 10,000 miles by foot, ski, pedal, paddle, and ice skates, and he lives in Anchorage. And over the years, it's been so much fun to read his trip reports and see the products that he's put out, and he's been an inspiration to so many people in the state and beyond. So we're really excited to have you here today. And I will pass the mic over to you.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. And I guess I just want to start by saying that it's kind of a busy time of year for me, but I did really want to reach out and contribute to the work that Susitna River Coalition is doing. I am a conservationist, and stewardship is a big part of my game and my game that I'm trying to get better at. So that's what made this a priority for me. So thanks for the work you do. And for anybody that's calling in that isn't familiar with this group or other conservation groups in Alaska, I urge you to kind of research what they're up to. It is hard work. So thank you. And my plan for our hour here together is pretty loose form. And I see in the questions already, Brian is interested in gear and weight and distances. And that's not actually what I have in mind too much, but we can steer it that direction. So since I can't see your faces, feel free to fill up that Q&A zone. And I'm probably not going to pay too much attention to it because I can't multitask that well. But Margaret can kind of step in and help direct where we go together, if that makes sense. Sound good? Okay. I'm gonna walk us through one trip that I took in this Western Susitna drainage, and it was as part of a wilderness classic. And so I'll introduce that first. And the wilderness classics for me have been kind of gateways into big swaths of Alaska's connected wilderness, which is like so unique, so amazing that we have these big areas that we can travel through and visit and kind of get a sense for the landscape without massive human footprints on it. And so one of the wilderness classics actually went through the Susitna-Watana Canyon and Dam site, and that was really cool. We're literally just kind of bushwhacking through this pretty thick forest, and there was a random like PVC tower in the middle of nowhere, and just trying to think of, well, what the heck could that be here for? And afterwards, somebody looked it up and looked up our location, our GPS, and figured out that that was part of the surveying that was done for that site. And likewise, what I'll talk about tonight was another classic that was on the west side of the Susitna. So we caught the Yentna River and the Kahiltna River, those big drainages. And I guess I'm torn between slideshows and showing my awesome shed background here. So maybe I'll jump back and forth between these, but let me just show you a map of the area that that we're looking at. And Margaret, you'll have to give me permission to share again. I think that changed when I logged off and on again.
Great, 1 second.
This route that I'm going to share was from 2015, and the way that the Wilderness Classics work is they're point A to point B. They're an event, and in some circles they can get called races, but we're not supposed to call them races because we don't have permits for them. Like, it's very, very grassroots. So it's a somewhat organized event. You have a starting point, you have an ending point, and that's it. Beyond that, each group or individual is responsible for choosing the route they want to take and for self-rescue if anything goes wrong. So for me, more than anything, it has been a community that sort of celebrated taking on outdoor challenges. And then I was introduced to mentors, to these more experienced participants, and they weren't bringing tents or they weren't bringing sleeping bags. And for me, that just seemed insane. Like, who goes into the mountains without a sleeping bag? But after a few years of doing it at my comfort level and sort of recognizing, oh yeah, I could get by in a warm jacket, curled up on a rock if I need to, whatever, then deciding to leave a sleeping bag behind or deciding to leave a tent behind. And with those mentors, with that them modeling what was possible, it just completely expanded my grasp of what was possible outdoors. And the reward from that was learning how capable our bodies are, how capable we are as humans to just deal with the hard stuff. And it's awesome, like, to just feel crushed and then sleep 2 hours and be like, oh yeah, I got this. Even if it's a hobbling got this, it's like, I can do this. Like, my human machine, the way that I'm built, is gonna like recover overnight if I drink some water, if I eat some food, and allow me to keep going. Or I don't need to sleep on a mattress, I can sleep on a rock. Like, that was just all super cool stuff for me to learn. So let me show you this route. I'll try again. Yep, and I got it this time. Thanks. And we'll start at the map view here. So for context, in case folks aren't familiar with this area or aren't calling in from Alaska, and I don't think you can see my cursor. So this whole region is a little bit northwest of Anchorage. Anchorage is just out of sight in the lower right corner. You can see Wasilla there in the lower right corner, and then Talkeetna up to on the right-hand side. So that star in the upper right, that was our starting point, Petersville, and you can access that on some gravel roads. And then the star that's all the way on the left is the Rohn cabin. So that's on the Iditarod Trail. And that was sort of a mandatory checkpoint. Mandatory is too strong and checkpoint is too strong too, but the routes had to go through Rohn. And then the star in the lower right, it's covering the Label Nancy Lake State Recreation Area. That's the finish. And the reason that we went to this area and I planned this route, this was a memorial route for Rob Kerr. And Rob drowned in the 2014 Wilderness Classic, which was a huge deal for the whole community. For me, Rob was a friend, and we'd been traveling together on that route a few days before he drowned. And I'm actually going to go into a little bit of detail, not about the drowning, because that's pretty hard, but about the rescue. And I'm doing that just because I'm looking on the list, I see familiar names, and I assume everybody that's here has some interest in playing outdoors. And I learned a lot through this process of what it's like to be involved in a rescue. And then I'll bring that up at the end too. So I'll give us kind of an opening and closing common theme. But I'm going to stop this screen for now. so that you can just look at me. So what happened with Rob was that we were pack rafting, and there's a technical section of water there called the Tana River. This is in the Wrangles. And Rob and his partner, Greg, portaged around the technical section, class 4 rapids. They walked, and it was a heinous walk. I know because I did portage as well, a different portage, but it took like 4 hours for us to get around this stuff. And they did that because that was part of their risk assessment. Rob doesn't love water. Greg's kind of following Rob. Rob was, I mean, they're the best buddies. But Rob had more experience with the outdoor Alaska stuff and with the Wilderness Classic specifically. Rob doesn't like water, so there's just no question. Of course, they're going to walk around these class 4 rapids. So they do that, and they put back in where it's class 2, but it's a big water. It's glacial. It's dynamic. So there aren't distinct rapids, but it's swirly and powerful. And Rob capsized and just poof, disappeared. Greg was able to recover his boat, but not Rob. So I had finished the course a couple of days before, and I'm already back in Anchorage because you're just whooped after these. The scale, oh gosh, what was that one? That might have been like 180 miles, and we did it in 4.5 days or 5 days. So just, you're covering a lot of ground, and your body, my body at least, would pay for that for weeks. So I'm back home, and I get a call from Rob's wife, who had heard from Greg. Greg's out camped on the river, and Greg says, Rob capsized. I've got his boat, but I don't know where he is. That's not that big of a deal when I hear that, because things go wrong, and we all have different levels of preparation for things going wrong, but people fall out of their boats, people get separated from their partners. These have happened to me countless times. And so at that point, that's not like a red flag. That's just sort of, I hope Rob's all right, and I hope they can reconnect, because Rob doesn't have any of his stuff. The river's cold, but he's wearing a life vest. He's wearing rain gear, which isn't as good as a dry suit, but can hopefully hold some heat in. So that's my perspective as informal organizer, but also participant, and just being familiar with these outdoor pursuits. That's not at all Tammy's perspective, right? His wife, she's like pretty concerned about Rob, rightly so. He's in the middle of nowhere. And everybody knows that Tana Canyon, that's a big deal. Like we talked about it beforehand. If anything goes wrong, it's going to be on the water. This course had a lot of water. So I am basically trying to convey to Tammy that, like, it's this call came in late in the afternoon, early in the evening. It's August, so there is some darkness creeping in. And I'd say, these things happen. He's probably on the shore walking back. We just got to wait a little while. And she called back in the morning, still no word. So Greg's been hollering, he's got a fire, he's got smoke, like he's trying to make it as easy as possible for Rob to find him. And if that hasn't happened overnight, then things start to feel more serious, and Tammy wants to call a local lodge there and see if they can help. And so I step in and I take that over. But it really was because Tammy, I could tell, like, I'm doing this for Tammy more than I'm doing this for Rob. I call that lodge, and it's early, 6:30 in the morning or something, and somebody, they call her Grandma. This is Ultima Thule Lodge, Paul Claus, lodge owner. So it's his mom. I don't know her real name, but they call her Grandma. She makes these amazing cookies. That's a different story. So I'm talking to her, and I'm like, here's what happened. Can you have somebody fly? Can you have somebody fly? And she's like, yep, the guys will be up, they'll be in here around 8:30 for breakfast. So I'll let them know then. And I had to be assertive, which is not something I'm real comfortable with, and just said, this is kind of a big deal. I know I'm asking a lot, but can you check in with the pilots now? And she did. And I knew one of the pilots that was part of the preparation for this whole event. So I talk to him, and I say Tana River, and he's like, whoa, Tana River, like, that's a big deal. That's kind of a key word. And so he's going to go fly right away. And he said, just based on the fact that this was near the Tana River, you should call the Rescue Coordination Center and just get the ball rolling, get the gears moving. So I do that. Ultimately, Lodge sends out a couple pilots. They're flying, and I'm talking with RCC. That's a kind of this joint entity between the Air National Guard and maybe the state troopers. But they're all professionals. You know, the pilots at Ultima Thule, the folks on the operators, and pretty soon I'm taken out of it because they don't need me anymore. I'm just kind of the middleman. They can communicate directly with Greg. They see Greg right away. They land, you know, get him food, whatever he needs, and then search and rescue comes in, like the volunteer search and rescue from McCarthy. There's a bunch of people walking the woods and hollering and going down the riverbanks. And ultimately, this was a body recovery. Rob drowned, seems like, instantly in that water, and that does kind of make sense with his discomfort with water. We do this thing as mammals. We don't have any control over it. This gasp reflex or torso reflex, sorry, where we just, like, your body knows something bad's about to happen, so it goes because it wants to trap all this oxygen, hold it inside. And the problem with that is when you do it near water, you aspirate water. You can aspirate water, and then you cough, you hyperventilate. It gets hard to control your breathing. And so this is especially true for immersion in ice water, cold water, or like ice fissures, that there are fatalities within that first 2 minutes. It doesn't have anything to do with hypothermia. It doesn't have anything to do with being cold. It's just the damn lungs. Like, we can't use our lungs, which we need. So it's kind of a downer way to start here. It doesn't have anything to do with the Susitna, but that process, I hadn't gone through that, you know, and that process of calling the Rescue Coordination Center, it's equivalent to calling 911. There's this whole hierarchy, and we don't have any control over that, but there are some key things to convey, and that's, you know, how long ago was it? How can they access the area? We know in this area that there aren't strips long enough to get a plane onto, so it's going to have to be a helicopter. But then that coordination center does the work of where's the nearest helicopter. And because it's in a park, they're initially going to look for a Park Service helicopter. And if that's not possible, they're going to ask the troopers, or they're going to ask the Air National Guard. They do all that, and the Air National Guard was the one that ended up coming in. That's, I guess, all I want to say about that for now. I will revisit sort of this rescue or sort of evacuation process at the very end, but I want to get into a little bit lighter hearted stuff. And I'm sure that I just triggered a bunch of questions from folks. So feel free to put those in, and Margaret can get me later. Okay. Whew. That was harder than I thought it was going to be. Let's talk a little bit about this route, and I'm going to go back to the slides. And you are welcome to ask questions and interrupt me. That actually makes things easier for me. So don't be afraid to interrupt. This course, 2015, this was a memorial route for Rob, and it's an awkward one. You can see by the shape here, but these were all meaningful places to Rob. So that first star, Petersville, I think it was maybe Tammy's parents had a cabin there, and a bunch of their friends, they call themselves the Outlaws. They've got these cabins there, super cool community. The star in the middle at the Rohn cabin, Rob was a volunteer for the ITI, maybe the Iditarod as well, at that cabin. So he spent every winter there. And so that was a meaningful place to him. And then that third star, the finish, was where he had built a cabin on Red Lake in the Nancy Lakes. And so these were chosen to be, I chose this route because these three spots were meaningful to Rob. And of course, Rob's friends and family and community all want to show up and support it. The classics were really important to him. They were part of his wedding vows. Like, that's how much this event meant to him. And that's kind of part of what our friendship was based on, was just how meaningful these experiences have been. So team heavy, these hoodies that everybody's wearing, that was a kind of a joke between Rob and the other participants. Rob carried a bunch of extra stuff, like sometimes that was beer, but sometimes it was like repair kits for things that, like for motors, like things they just accidentally had in his bag. So we jokingly referred to Rob and whoever he was with as Team Heavy, while the rest of the participants were generally traveling fast and light, or ultra light on the other end of the spectrum. So we show up to this compound, and it is going off. There's a barbecue, there's music, there's bonfires. And for all of the rookies, people new to this event, they don't know any better. So they think this is normal, like, oh, this must be the start of the Wilderness Classic. But for everybody that was familiar with these events, like there's never this many people, it's never this well organized. And so several people pulled in and then left because they thought it was a wedding. They thought they were interrupting a wedding. And then they're looking for other, was it the next cabin? Is it the previous cabin or whatever? They end up showing up again. And then they're psyched because it's like a wedding, but without the wedding part. So very social and very celebratory, and which was just awesome for us. They provided some of Rob's go-to snacks. He had this amazing relationship with Flintstones. Shoot, I did pretty well, but the Flintstones got me. He would have these little what do you call it? Like just little conversations between the different Flintstones characters. Anyway, awesome. And cheese packs, just classic Rob food here. And this bin was available for everybody to take these little care packages. It was really neat. Velveeta cheese. And this is a mix of the participants and the friends and family of Rob. Really nice. And so we start walking west, and it's pretty damn nice. It's ATV trails and that view of the Alaska Range in the background. Super cool. And it transitions pretty quickly into swamps. And swamps are something I want to learn more about because, well, mostly I think because of the leave no trace stuff. Like I'm a little bit late to the leave no trace, like the formal leave no trace. Like I read the book a couple of years ago, and it talks about how a durable surface is so much better for traveling on because people don't leave a trail, don't leave a path, and wetlands are the most susceptible to damage. And I talked to some trail designers that I think they said even if you have like 5 to 10 people walk the same path through a wetland, you can that track, that impact can last several years. And a lot of what we were navigating by through these swamps were snow machine tracks, or I should say the imprint of the tracks that was left over. And my guess there is that like when the snow machine tracks or packs down the snow, and then that snow is the latest thing to thaw in the spring. There's some difference there. But anyway, there was a bunch of that through these swamps, and that was part of what we were walking through. And some of the travel was that your feet are just wet, no big deal. Some of it, I don't know if folks have experienced this, there'd be like maybe a 5 to 10 foot circle that would sort of plunge with you as you walked. And it's like, you're basically on a waterbed, which is a little bit eerie. This is the part I want to learn more about, like the evolution of swamps. I don't really understand what's going on, like why there's soil on top of water, which is what that feels like. Afterward, I heard from a few folks that, because everybody pretty much traveled through these swamps, and people shared experiences of just plunging down to the waist, or this one guy, Alan, who came up from out of state, he said every time he looked up after plunging through, his partner Lee was just there. He had the camera out, like everything was ready. It was like Lee knew that Alan was going to break through and got set up with the camera. And Alan was just like, seriously, like, how about you tell me somewhere else to walk? And he's like, no way, this is way more entertaining. So this was a memorable stretch of swamp. But this must be the Susitna River. This is what you're approaching, and this is great for morale, right? You see mountains and that really wide drainage there, and that usually means gravel bars, and gravel bars are great for walking. That for leave no trace, that's that nice durable surface. So that's about, I've moved the star now. This is that must be the Susitna River. So we're still cranking west on that green route, and we get these amazing views of the big Alaska Range peaks. You can tell the footing here, though. It's tough. Like it's swampy and bumpy still through here. And this would be Lake Creek that drains. I don't know what the name of the lake would be. This is dusk, and we're getting ready to find camp, and I don't know why we just decided to get across this before we set up camp, but kind of a surreal experience with the steam. I guess it's not steam, but the fog coming off the water, and again, these amazing views of the Alaska Range. So there's Lake Creek, and that's a major fishing destination. I haven't been on it other than that crossing, but it's on my list of places to revisit. You can see what's coming up next is just a lot of green, and this was hard. This is Sarah down climbing a terrible, Devil's Club, loose rock, alder patch to get to the East Fork of the Yentna. Across the East Fork, that's where we're at now. Our travel in there, I can't remember who asked the question about pace, but the travel through that kind of country is about half a mile an hour. It's really slow. And I'll share one of the stories from from some of the other participants. Matt Kupelik and John Pekar, they had referred several times to having navigational challenges. And at the end of that ended up being a code word for John lost his phone, which he uses as a GPS. So they've lost their main navigation device, and from that point on, we're using these like really low resolution screen grabs of Google Earth. So something like a little bit better than what I've got here. And they couldn't read the labels on anything, and so people would say, "Yeah, but then did you see that? Did you go up the West Fork of the Yentna?" And they're like, "Oh, is that what that said?" So that was their experience. We had to cross from the East Fork of the Yentna to the West Fork, and there were some lakes in between, and we jumped in the lakes to rinse off. It was just hard, sweaty, dirty travel. And part of that was because of these caterpillars, and I don't know if they'll show up that well on everybody's screen, but there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in this picture, and that's just on the backpack. So of course Sarah's got them in her hair and on her hat and her shirt and everything. This was a crazy infestation that I've never seen anywhere else, and the downside was that it was disgusting, and the upside was that they had just devastated the alder forest, and without the leaves it was a lot easier for us to walk through. So it was actually, I don't know, it was probably grosser than helpful, but there was a little bit of help in it. And then this is something I'd like to learn more about too. Like, is that thing moving across Alaska, or is it just that summer, that temperature, that zone? I'm not sure, but they were everywhere. And we get to the West Fork of the Yentna, and we met up with Toby and Todd, other participants on the route, and they were being really sheepish. They were sort of, they're psyched to see us. We're happy to hang out with them and trying to ask about where they're going next. And, they're not really giving any straight answers. And afterward, we didn't see them again. And afterward, I asked, I was like, why aren't you guys like more open about what was going on? And they said they had already decided to bail. Like because of that half a mile an hour section, they were behind their pace as far as what food they were bringing. And they've got this great river here. It's an easy exit. And so they had decided to bail, but they didn't want to influence us. They didn't want to sort of spark that idea for us. So they were trying to be hush hush about it, but instead I thought they were just being jerks. So I don't know what's the best way to manage that. Sarah and I decided to keep going. And here we are on the west fork of the Yentna. And the travel was pretty good for us for a while now, because this was a lower volume river and huge valley as far as its width, and just choked with gravel. And so we would walk up the gravel bars until we were forced to cross. And then a lot of the crossings we were able to just walk, and the crossings that were too deep or too swift, we ended up carrying the pack raft on our backpack, so that it was a really quick transition to just plop it in the water, jump in the boat, and paddle across to the next bar. We had a tailwind through this section as well, so we were getting pushed along pretty nicely. It was really good travel. This was, I just checked with Sarah in the house, this was our first summer together. We just started dating the winter before, and so this was a bonding experience, I guess you could say. And we had set up this shelter. It's a tarp over our two pack rafts, and we slept on the pack rafts across their length, if that makes sense. So side by side, so that we could try to trap as much heat with each other as possible. And then we had a little quilt over us, and that's the only time I've used a quilt. And this wasn't great. We ended up, kind of sleeping in the dry suits and shivering and not getting too much sleep, and then moving again as soon as it was light enough to do that in the morning. But I thought you might appreciate seeing our shelter. It's super light, and that's why we're doing it. Then we can start walking, and things are great. Eventually this river, like the inside of each corner is good walking, like this gravel bar, but the outside is cliffed out or too brushy, like you can see here. And so it was just this game of walking the insides, crossing over to the other side, walking that inside, back and forth, back and forth. But the farther we made it up the drainage, the swifter these corners got, and the more technical, I guess, the ferrying was. And so that started getting comfortable, and we reached a decision point, and that's what this star is. And the decision point is basically to stay low in the valley, which is what we decided to do, basically to get up and access some via some sort of the foot of a couple glaciers, or maybe just one glacier. What the other folks did in this location was, and this was a group of maybe 5 different people, they chose to climb up a ridge, to climb, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 feet to get out of these drainages, and then to travel high country for a while. And they said it was the most spectacular scenery they've ever seen in Alaska. So I regret that we didn't do that. Our route was okay, but we just had a lot of water crossings that were tricky, stuff like this. It's not that deep, but it was really swift. So we're working up into the high country here, into the Alpine. And this was really the prize for me. This was the area that I was most excited about visiting. The Kachatna spires, there's pictures coming up, but it's this recently deglaciated, nice rock, easy travel, big glaciers. This was just stunning. And the high country here, once we got off that glacial sneak, this is probably about the point where the other folks that had gone to that high route dropped back down. So their route was more efficient, even though it had that big climb, because they didn't have to mess with some of the water crossings and that glacier travel that we did. But this is good walking. We're out of the wet stuff. We're in the high country. And we aren't the only folks that are enjoying the high country. So we saw a bunch of animals, and that also was welcome. That was really a treat. You see Laura's question about distance, and at this point we're probably at about mile 90. The total route would be 300, and I'll come back to that. So we're psyched. Good weather, good walking. We're dry. Things are awesome. This is out of, we mentioned that half a mile an hour pace, and now we're in probably like 3 mile an hour pace. Stuff is cruiser. And this is the north side of those Kichatna spires. So these big granitic walls, glaciers. This is high on my list to revisit. It's a really expensive area to get to by flight. It is a lot cheaper to walk, but I don't think I really want to walk in there again. And we're psyched again. Morale is high, just being able to see this beautiful country. So once we've wrapped around the Kichatna spires, we're starting to drop down, and I think this drainage is called Tatina, and it's a drainage that'll take us all the way down to that Rohn cabin. And so there's that star. Just to the west, you can see that blob of those big glaciers of the Kichatna spires, and the rest of this route is just a float down the Tatina. And I didn't get much any real pictures through here because it was evening, and there was water. There wasn't a lot initially. That wasn't as dry as this picture makes it look, but it was a bony float. And there were a few groups that came through here that were in 2-person packrafts where you kneel on the floor on that model, and they just destroyed the bottom of their boats and had to put padding under their knees. But ended up with a bunch of holes in the boats because of how shallow the water was. But at this point, your legs are whooped, and so you're just trying to milk every mile of floating that you can as a way to recover and get your muscles back. So we did that all in the dark because we know there's this cabin, the Rohn cabin, waiting at the bottom, and that's going to be this great recovery pocket. And here's the Rohn cabin, and it's an awesome cabin. It's in great shape. It's really well maintained because of the Iditarod traffic that goes through there. We spent a night there. You can see the location. You can float north there on that's the South Fork of the Kuskokwim River. So you could take that out to pretty close to Nikolai on the main Kuskokwim, and out to McGrath, out to where I grew up. And from here, the options are fly out. We're at, I think, a mile 120, 130. The planned route was that pink line, which is, I think, 150 miles of floating. It's floating. That's not hard on your body necessarily, but it does take time. And then maybe 20, 30 miles of hiking to get to Nancy Lakes, get to that finish point. And so Sarah and I actually did walk another 15 miles going up that South Fork and looking at that passing. It's called the Goodman Pass, that would bring you into the drainage that would eventually be in the Squentna. But we are just kind of looking at the clock and imagining 150 river miles in front of us, and decided to turn back and go to the cabin and fly out from there. So we went back to the cabin, spent another day there, and met up with other participants, which was awesome. Oh, I forgot about this. I have a story to tell. This is in the cabin, and I noticed Philip Esai wrote his name here, and Philip has passed away now, but he was an elder in Nikolai. Nikolai is like, can't remember, maybe 80 miles upriver from McGrath. So I growing up in McGrath, I had a little bit of exposure to the folks in Nikolai. And I did another trip where we finished at Philip's fish camp. And so he was there. I think Marie maybe is his wife. They were there, we showed up, and I think they knew that we might show up. So they were happy to host, to have a conversation. My folks were driving up from McGrath on the riverboat to pick us up and bring us down to McGrath. And Philip had a bunch to say. We were hobbling, I've got blisters, and he was just disgusted is too strong of a word, but it's close. He was just like, why would you let yourself get a blister? Like, kind of, what are you thinking? Because he was so good at being outdoors, and if you get a hot spot or whatever, he's like, you stop and take care of it. And so the fact that we're hobbled up, that we're dealing with these little aches and pains, he just didn't get it. He's like, that's not really how you play the game. So that was a really cool lesson to learn. And we are hungry. I had a bunch of food rot on this trip, and so he cast a line like twice, pulled in a pike, fried it in Crisco. It's like ready for us in 15 minutes. It was amazing. We're scarfing it down. But the story I wanted to share from Philip was that we're talking about bears, and he said, I'm not going to get it quite right, but he basically said, Daddy always said I was too slow to spear brown bear. I'm like, whoa. And he said, and he was right. I speared a lot of black bear, but I never speared a brown bear. Just like, this dude, I think I'm just, sometimes I think I'm kind of a badass. I'm accomplishing all these great things outdoors. And then this guy, Philip, is like, doesn't have blisters, just got a fish and speared black bears when he was younger. Just like, holy cow, man. This guy's amazing. Just a couple of pictures of this kind of turnaround for Sarah and I, where we walked up the river, and just if things had been real easy, maybe we would have kept going, but it just wasn't quite easy enough. Like, we're getting into thick forest, and it's dark, and we're just like, man, you know what? Let's turn around. It's a hard decision for me to turn around on these. It's like, we've already gone at this point now, 130 miles, 135 miles, which is a lot, and it was hard, and I want the accomplishment of having completed the thing that I start. Another thing that happened that I'm just remembering looking at this picture is that a seam across the back of Sarah's pants blew up, and like right in this section, and it was super buggy, really mosquito-y. And we have needle and thread, of course. We have our repair kit stuff, and I was like, you should take off your pants, I'll stitch them up really quick, and then you can put them back on. She's like, there's no way I'm taking these off right now with all these mosquitoes. You got to sew them on, like, here, well, I'll stand here. And so Sarah, like, stood, she must have been, somehow Sarah managed to be like swiping the mosquitoes off of me while I stitched her pants back together while she was wearing them, just standing there in the brush. And the bugs are really bad, and so you're getting, it's kind of crazy making. But this picture just reminded me of that instant field repair. I'll carry a needle taped onto my Leatherman, so it's always there, just like on the flat part of Leatherman, and then a little roll of dental floss. That's been in my kit forever. We go back to that Rohn cabin, and now another group, or maybe two groups, are there. That's right. So 5 other folks have arrived since then. This is what they look like. Matt and John, those were the ones that had the navigational challenges. They are going to fly out with us. And then that's Meg in the background. She's fixing the bottom of the boat. I mentioned that her boat, those two-person boats got shredded. So she's doing a bunch of field repairs there. And then they are going to finish the course, and it took them another 6 days, I believe. So this halfway point was still pretty darn far from the finish. These are probably Matt's gross feet. I won't stay there too long. So we fly back, and I'm going to bring us back to the sort of emergency planning and conversation here, and then I'll share a couple stories. I think I'll stop the slideshow. So Sarah and I fly back, and we're in phone reception. We are in touch with the volunteer who who offered to help with any logistics while people were out on the course. And the way that that works is it was Wendy Moe, so it was one of the participants partners, and I said, this person really doesn't have to do anything. Somebody might call and need help, like coordinating a flight out or something, and so maybe you could help with that. But really, this is like low labor. But if you could help, that'd be awesome. And so I think 26 people ended up calling her for help getting out. And some of the interactions were pretty funny because she's managing this through text, in-reach messaging, getting spot messages. Another group had lost their spot and it's just blipping out there in the middle of nowhere. And so their family is worried. At some point, she responded to one group, like, okay, sounds good, I love you, thinking that it was Todd, her partner, that she was responding to, but it wasn't Todd, it was this other group. And like, okay, that's awkward. Another guy calls on the sat phone and he says, happy effing birthday. And Wendy's like, oh, hello, it's not my birthday. And the guy, I think it was Dan, super embarrassed, he's like, oh, sorry, wrong number, and he hangs up. I mean, it's a sat phone, like, who's calling. Like, there aren't that many people. And Wendy's on the other end saying, like, wait, where are you? Like, are you finished? Do you need help getting out? And like, boom, he's gone. He's so embarrassed. So I get back and I can start taking some of that load from Wendy. And the part I want to share is that Josh Mumm finished this route in 5 days and 22 hours. So 300 miles, and he was traveling on his own, just unbelievable. He got into that Rohn cabin a day ahead of us. There was a bunch of food there that friends of Rob's had flown in, food and Coke and Oreos, all this great stuff. And Josh was the first person through, and he was really sensitive that he didn't want to overeat because he thought, maybe there's 30 people behind him. So he had like a single brat, and then he kept moving. And it ended up being that maybe 8 people were there total, and we had a ton of food that we had to haul back out. So Josh does this superhuman thing and finishes the route. And then this next group of 3, they finished in 11 days. So Josh was basically 6 days, and the next group's 11 days. And they're not checking in. And nobody really knows what's going on. We know they have an in-reach because that's required as much as anything could be required in these. And again, I'm in the mindset as like, yeah, I go outside and I don't always want to be plugged into electronics. It's nice to take a break from that, and then could respect that. But then I'm hearing from the family, I'm hearing from the wife and the daughter's mom, right? Who's like, have you heard anything? Like, it's day 9. Josh finished on day 6. What's going on? And eventually they had somebody fly overhead just to get eyes, just to see where they were at. And they were just fine. They're floating along, and they were doing their trip in the way that they wanted to do it. But it was pretty frustrating for me as an organizer, and especially frustrating for the family to not have that check-in. And so this was another learning point for me, which is that we're carrying those devices not for ourselves, but really for the family. And that my inclination to unplug while I'm out there, that really changed after being on the other side of the coin here, and recognizing how meaningful it was to the wife, to the mom, to the dad, whoever, to just have that little check-in, like, yep, things are fine. And that's all it takes. So a learning lesson for me. I just wanted to share that with you. And then I'm just going to share a couple other funny stories that I heard about from the other groups, and then we'll wrap it up and see if you have any questions. My favorite story was Rob Wing, who was another solo traveler, but ended up with different people at different parts on the course. His scratch, everybody else, the 26, they all found different ways out other than going through Rohn like we did. And so Rob is at Yentna Station, which is like a lodge on the Yentna River. And he walks in, which is already weird. Nobody walks in to this river lodge in the middle of summer, and he's having a burger, he's having a beer, he's talking to the owner. What do you think the best route is to get to Red Lake from here? And the owner's like, huh? And Rob says, or maybe Anchorage. Is there a good way for me just to get to Anchorage? And Rob's like, and he's a little delirious. He's been traveling hard for 5 or 6 days. And he's like, yeah, I was trying to get to Rohn, but in Petersville, blah, blah. The owner went into the kitchen, and whoever the staff was there, he said, you got to cut this guy off. He's nutty. Don't give him any more beer. Because what he was saying just didn't make sense. Like, Rob's carrying a tiny backpack. There's no way he came from Petersville and was Rohn and Anchorage, like all of this. So I love picturing that interaction. And then the other one I like, and maybe I'll close with this one. Greg ended up being sort of the grandfather of a group of 8 or 10 people that all decided to scratch together to exit together, and they're going to float down the rivers because that's the easiest option, and then end up getting a boat ride for the last stretch out to the highway. And it's like herding cats or something, because there's some new participants. I think it was mostly new folks. Greg's done a bunch of these, remember, and Greg was the one who had been Rob's partner. And whenever he couldn't get them, Greg knew what he wanted to do. It's like, yeah, we need to keep floating, or yeah, we should get off the river because it's dark or whatever. There was all this conversation, different opinions, and I'm like, no, I don't think we should do that. And so the default is that he would say, look, this is what Rob told me to do in this setting, like, this is where you get off the river and you start a fire. That's what Rob told me to do. And he's totally lying. He's just making this stuff up, but he's given credit to Rob. And then everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, if that's what Rob would do, then that's what we should do too. So I love that image too of Greg kind of stepping into that role and being the mother duck, leading folks down the river. So I think that's where I want to end. I included that rescue part just because I feel like it is relevant to folks that are playing outdoors, both in terms of how much I value the communication part, and also what it looks like if you end up having to push that button or coordinate a rescue. And then other than that, I just wanted to convey how amazing being able to visit these tracts of wilderness are. That's so unique to us in Alaska, and I'm so scared of us losing that. And it does feel inevitable, but I hope it can get pushed off as long as possible. My friend Brad Micklejohn, he said something that stuck with me about how, like, we can win these conservation battles over and over and over again because you have to, right? Keep taking them to court, whatever, and you lose once and that's it, because that impact lasts so long, and that feels so unfair. But I think about that in terms of traveling through those wetlands, and just in terms of our politics and the work that Susitna River Coalition is trying to do. I would be happy to field some questions. I see some. Margaret, do you want to say anything before what should we do?
Sure. Well, I just want to say it's also really interesting to hear about you talking about wetlands and how fragile they are. And it's, it doesn't take much to change these places. And I think that that's one of the things I keep on thinking about as we think, as this conversation keeps coming up, is that it doesn't take much to cause a great deal of change or affect everything else. So it's incredible to see those pictures, especially the Kachatnas fires. I don't know, those are pretty remarkable. I had one quick question. When you're planning these trips, are you looking at, when you look at the map, do you have some pinpointed spots where you have the potential to bail? Like, is that part of your safety plan?
Yeah, and I am on I'm on one end of the spectrum here in terms of the amount of work I do for planning and preparation. And it's actually pretty interesting. How much of this do I want to go into? I have I'm working with a therapist, and he's like, do you do you think of yourself as an anxious person? Do you suffer from anxiety? And I'm like, no, not at all. And it's because I plan everything out and I put it in all these really nice containers. And when stuff's not in those containers, I struggle. And that's true in my relationship. That's true in a lot of aspects of my life. It's not as true outdoors because there I know things. I know I don't have control over them. Like I love water. I spend a lot of my time, I teach swift water. I love pack rafting. I can't control the water. But there isn't a human part there as far as like, could we have made a phone call? Did that food drop get where it needed to go? Whatever. So there's something here where planning helps me manage anxiety, apparently. And so I spend a lot of time on Google Earth and I draw the route and then I draw plan B, plan C. Oh, there's a cabin here. Oh, there's an airstrip there. And then I collect phone numbers of the nearest charter services. And I have the phone number of the Rescue Coordination Center, and I've got the nearest troopers. I've got all that with me. So I'm super prepared going into these. I wasn't 10 years ago, but that's how I've evolved into this. So much so that I teach it. I have online courses where it's like, let's build these amazing trip plans. And the point isn't to narrow the scope down and say, I'm only going to do this. I'm only going to stay on this purple line. Instead, it's to open up the possibilities of, oops, there's a surprise. Oops, we can't cross that river. Oops, it rained 3 days, whatever. So that's all part of my planning strategy now.
Cool.
I see these questions, so maybe I can field the other ones. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Go for it.
Okay, so Chris wants to know if my incredible dental floss butt pant seam held up, and it definitely held up during the trip, and then I think it was time to get rid of those pants. And Laura wants to know if the Classic has changed rules in terms of checking in or other guidelines, and not at all, because it really is, you're provided a starting point and an ending point, and the ending point usually has some food, which is awesome, and that's it. Like, part of the beauty of these events is that, like, you really are on your own. People can, you can't say, no, you can't do this. And I struggle a little bit with that, with the idea of telling people you need to check in every day, you need to check in every 3 days. I want that to be a personal decision. I just wanted to share my revelation that, man, it sure is nice when you hear from somebody. The way that Sarah and I do this, and of course this has evolved over the years too, we have the device, we let our contacts know, we have one person that's our in-town contact, and that's who we will go through if we actually need anything. We might also say, check in with the parent or whatever, but we've got the one person. That person's usually capable of helping schedule a flight, or familiar with the area, or kind of played the game, has done this stuff outside. I lost my line of thought there a little bit. So before we go, we give a trip plan and we say, we might lose our device. If we lose our device and you haven't heard from us in 3 days, we're going to try to exit on our own. First thing we want you to do at day 4 is put a flight overhead and just see if they can spot us. Here are the colors of our boats. Here's the color of our shelter. So that's all in a document that we hand off before the trip. And that includes a copy of our route, like what I showed on the screen there, in that level of detail or even more. So I think that's the better approach, is to kind of take that personal responsibility and decide, because there is something really valuable about going into the woods and not looking at a screen for a week. And I want to respect that too. So it's that conversation with the partner. It's Rob having in his wedding vows, like, the classics are really important to me. It's those conversations I think are the real emphasis here. Laura also wanted to ask about evidence of human impacts along the route. And what we mostly saw at the start were those ATV trails, and then through the wetlands, we could see the ghost snow machine trails, and a little bit of like markers on trees, things like that. there's a community, I think it was called Collinsville or something. It was 3 guys and a school bus that kind of felt in the middle of nowhere. It was definitely, I can't remember exactly where it was. Maybe between the Kahiltna and the Yentna. It was a mining operation, and they had somehow got the school bus in there on a winter cat track, years and years ago. But that was a surprise in the middle of nowhere. It's like, what the heck is this thing? And then I don't think we saw anything until the Rohn cabin. So none of the Tatina, none of the Kichatna spires. We didn't see any micro garbage or anything through all of that country, which was awesome. When we reached the Rohn cabin, of course, that area and the Iditarod Trail comes through there. There's markers for that. And there was a trapping cabin that we saw on the river as well that wasn't the Rohn cabin. So little bits and pieces there.
How much air traffic did you encounter? Was there much?
I don't honestly remember, but I would guess not much. It's not, yeah, I don't know. Like the flights to McGrath do go right over there, go right over the Rohn area. So maybe flights to Nome. But I think we were off the path from Fairbanks or anything. I don't really remember.
Yeah. And then how much wildlife were you seeing? There was a picture of the bears up high. Was there other evidence of different critters out there?
I don't remember that very well either, since it's been 8 years, but a bunch of bears I remember, and moose I remember too. And then caterpillars, lots of caterpillars. Actually do you think should we show the 4-minute video?
Oh yeah, go for it. That would be great.
If there aren't questions screaming in.
Yeah, that'd be a great closing.
Okay, it'll take me a second to pull this up.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, I'll go ahead and drop in the chat. We have a petition to ask the governor to not pursue the West Susitna access road anymore. It'd be great to check it out. It'd be an extremely expensive project, and one that it would again change the character of this region forever.
Are you going to send a link out to that to participants here? How do folks?
Yeah, it's right in the chat there. So y'all can all
chat. Okay.
Take a look.
And before I start this, I see another question from Chris. Do you ever do any deliberate natural sound recording? And I haven't, and it's only because the big camera that I carry, you can hear the image stabilizer in the lens. And so I feel like I'm either hearing that or I'm hearing wind. I would love to find a microphone or a solution that didn't do that, because when I have that audio, I always really appreciate it. But because of my equipment, that hasn't been a priority for me. Okay, here's a video from this trip, and it's 4 minutes long. Okay, there you have it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all the tales that you have from that trip, and really enjoyed hearing about the special tribute that trip was to Rob. That's really cool. So thank you for sharing all of the pieces of that. I know you have a few things you have going on here in the next few months, so I'd love to hear, give you the opportunity to share with folks.
I just remembered, you just reminded me about like the tribute part, and an aspect I didn't mention was that the intention was for everybody to finish by July 4th and be at that Red Lake cabin, at the cabin that Rob built on July 4th, and we didn't make it on time, and not many people did, but a few people did, and then there was a big barbecue there, and just again that the tribute part, all his friends and family there, and then a few of the folks from the classic, several that had scratched were able to travel back up and get there, and I think Josh might have been the only person that made it en route. Another group, this John Lapkus and Michael Martin, they scratched, but floating down probably the Susitna at that point, and just had to walk over to the lake. And Tammy told me afterwards she got a message, and he said, "We're only 8 miles from the cabin. We should be there tonight." And then the next day, "We're only 3 miles from the cabin. We should be there tonight." It took several days. The travel was so hard. And in retrospect, this was a terrible route, that was almost impossible to finish. Josh did it with superhuman strength, and then the group of 3 that took 11 days to do it. And part of me was, man, I made something too hard. I messed up. But then from talking with other folks, they're like, it's supposed to be a challenge, and if it was too easy, it wouldn't have the same allure. But my favorite insight about this was that Rob was really good at bailing. Rob turned around more often than he finished, and so even that was a good tribute to Rob. So I just wanted to share with that part. As far as you asked, what's going on, it's interesting, since 2015, I've switched out of doing safety messaging and outreach just as sort of hobby stuff, and trying to make a business out of it. So I have a bunch of online courses. The trip planning course is a big one. That's where I mentioned like building this document and doing a bunch of mapping and using recent satellite imagery and stuff to plan a trip and kind of open up to the possibilities of things going wrong. But I do ice rescue instruction, swiftwater rescue instruction, both online and in person. So I have a bunch of that stuff on my website. Maybe I can put that in the chat box. That's pretty simple. People can look in there if they're interested. But boom.
Great, thanks. And was there a giveaway too?
Oh yeah, I should put that in there too. There is a multi-brand mega packraft package giveaway right now. Like all you have to do is enter your email, and the prize package is worth like $3,800 or something. It's absolutely insane. So I'll put that link in there too. And it's like a pack raft and a paddle and a life vest and base layers and my book and instruction from me. Sarah, my wife's her summer fitness program. Like it's an awesome package. So folks should jump on that.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being here today, and sharing all your stories. It's always fun to see what comes through on your newsletter too. So folks should definitely sign up for that. It's always fun to read, and you always learn a lot. And it's total inspiration for getting out, and with summer right around the corner, maybe it's fun to look through. For the Susitna River Coalition, we have a big summer coming up. We're continuing to watch West Susitna Access, so please sign up for our newsletter right on our website. There potentially are going to be some big opportunities to engage here in the coming months. In addition, this is our last winter speaker event of the season, so you can find us again in October. In addition, all of our winter speaker events are on our YouTube channel, so you can find folks talking about Pacific lamprey in the Susitna, and peony farming and the Western Susitna drainage, and the history of Rainy Pass Lodge, just a huge variety of things. It's always fun to hear tales from scientists and researchers and adventurers all throughout the watershed. So check it out. There's some good things on there for snowy days like we have coming up here. Also, we have a riparian planting day that will be happening in Talkeetna in June. So that's going to be a fun project. We're always looking for volunteers for that. You can find us in Talkeetna at the Denali Education Center coming up here on April 22nd for an Earth Day nonprofit fair. We will also be at the Fairbanks Sportsman Show, which will be from April 21st to the 23rd. And then the Kenai Sportsman Show and Outdoor Show as well. So come find us down there. We'll have lots of information for you on MEA elections, which are our utility co-op board elections. We have a lot of information on that. We'll have prizes, giving away a trip with Mahay's Jet Boat Adventures as part of that Sportsman Show deal. So come see our booth. In addition, we're also working and monitoring the Mat-Su-Borough riparian setback ordinance. And so we'll have some information coming out about that. So please sign up for a newsletter, check it out. Thank you so much, Luc, for being here. Really appreciate it again. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Have a great night. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye.